what do you guys think of taking down the statues? I'm a horrible history person, so I don't care. I think everyone's afraid to talk about this.
No, I'm not afraid to talk about it.
I don't mind talking about it.
I don't think anything should be vandalized or toppled.
Yeah.
I'm actually okay with people wanting to take down the Confederate monuments, which I've done a lot of soul searching on that. I used to take completely the other position. I've read a lot of Southern stuff, and I used to think it was the South that should have won the Civil War. But, I'm okay with people being offended that Confederate monuments are on government property, and, that they don't like the idea that these folks were slave owners or that fought in some shape or form for slavery, even if maybe they didn't own slaves or maybe they didn't like it personally. They still fought for the Confederate States of America, which did secede for reasons of slavery. And I recently read the Declarations of Secession from most of them, and in there they're like, yeah, we're seceding because slavery. So I understand that, and if they want to have town halls and that they want to educate people and want to have a big grand talk about it and put heads together, I'm an example of someone that's been convinced otherwise.
You've been converted,
right? So it can happen, and there's a peaceful way to go about this. And
right.
if my position, which is I'm okay with them taken down, if that's wrong, then let's listen to the other side just as well, and let's come to an understanding. But I'm all about discussion and talk, town halls, petitions, calls to your congressman, calls to your congresswoman.
So doing it the correct way.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Not just
Voting
them
on
down.
them.
When I saw the statue the statue that came down in Durham, North Carolina, regardless of how I felt, when I saw them pull it down, it made me kind of sad.
Yeah,
Because
that's not the way it should have been done.
Yeah, and I can't even articulate why it makes me sad.
I'll tell you why it makes me a little upset is because it's very reminiscent of the way that ISIS does things.
Well,
I don't want to compare it to
right.
ISIS, but
Right.
you see ISIS go in. The first thing they do is they tear up historical.
Buddhist
Right.
temple.
They tear down historical statues. They do it in the same exact way. I don't have a problem taking down statues, but you gotta do it the right way. You gotta vote on it. You gotta bring it up. And you got to make sure that if there are more people who want it to stay, then they've got to be heard too, right? But in terms of just statues in general, at this point, I'm kind of the mindset of just saying no. It's whenever somebody says I'm offended, I want this statue down, then I say no, because the people who want it down to me, I feel are the perpetually offended, and I have to dig my heels in because if they're going to go after statues, where does the buck stop in that regard? Like, what statues do not offend you that you don't want to take down? And I think you just kind of it feels like I'm talking to my niece who is a child, and then when she wants something, I say, okay, but can I have this too? No. If I would have said no the first time, we wouldn't have had this conversation now. It wouldn't have been an issue. And I don't mind having going through the appropriate means, but just tearing it down without without doing any of that sort of irks me.
Well, and
I tend to feel that you're tearing down history. We have Holocaust camps that we keep so that we remember these horrible things in history that have happened. We have the Berlin Wall that, while it was torn down, there are still remnants of to remember these horrible things that have happened.
But we don't have statues of Hitler to remember the Holocaust.
No,
You know what I'm saying? We
no.
have statues of Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson to remember what? Slavery?
I don't.
Or to
But
remember...
And in the South, it seems like those statues are there to honor those guys because of the idea that the South will rise again.
Partly.
Partly.
I don't know if it's the fact that the South will rise again. I think it's. From an educational standpoint, I feel like it's a historical thing that. If we don't have something, then we're doomed to repeat it.
But what is the historical thing?
Yeah. Let me rephrase that original statement as I think that a lot of Southern boys that I know
Well,
have hero worship toward those people when maybe it's not just a remembrance, it's a celebration of, and hey, let's go do it again. It feels like that. And I know a lot of history has been sanitized in that situation so that it doesn't feel like it's necessarily as bad as what it is. But I don't know. And the fact that those statues were put up in Jim Crow times and in the Civil War times, is that right?
Well,
did I get that information right?
Had a resurgence
Took my
in
baby
the
away. Oh.
in the
Oh, yeah.
1918, 1925 era.
Yeah.
They were having huge marches. That may have been the time when
That was
Senator Robert
definitely
C.
the time when
Byrd.
Byrd was in there.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a big thing in the 20s, starting maybe 1915, somewhere there about on into the 20s.
So those statues were really a middle finger.
Yeah, and the KKK has strong ties to Southern history. One of the founding members was Nathan Bedford Forrest, and there's statues of him around. But I mean, you're right. There's a lot of people. We live in the Appalachian region. There's a lot of folks who cherish the South, and I wouldn't call them explicit racists.
I don't.
They
I
have.
don't know if they cherish the South for the race reason.
That's what I'm saying.
I think there's a lot of rebel spirit, is what it is.
It's a big.
There's that spirit of there's rebellion. There's you can make that change that even the country was founded on. The fact that we had a revolution to create the country and there was this rebellion of the South. I think there's a lot of that too.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
and I I can understand that, and I think a lot of people see the whole Civil War as
One big race thing.
not but a lot of Southerners may see it as one big small government, my property.
Right.
It's
States'
it's
rights,
a
let us
small
do what we
government
need
versus
to.
big government thing. It's a culture, a slow culture, agrarian, agricultural culture versus an industrial culture.
I
It's
think we still fight a lot of that today.
I mean,
especially
it's
here
the
in our
North always
state.
telling the South what to do.
The big cities telling the country folk what to
Mm-hmm.
do.
And that rage is what brings them back to their Southern roots or Southern
Right.
heritage. That's a big part of it. They just forget the racism aspect of it
Yeah,
all.
well, I mean, at some point you have to confront the fact that that all is true, and I feel a lot of that same rebellious spirit. But the catalyst for them at the time was slavery, and they were mad about the fact that the North would not let the new states become slave states, which would in essence stop Southern culture from progressing, because all of the new territory east of Missouri, west of Missouri, would become northern states in all but name. Even if it was Southern California, they were going to be non-slave states, which stopped the South in its tracks. That ended Southern culture at that line, and then the North would come around, have that much more electoral votes.
Right.
They would tell the South what to do, and that was it. But in these declarations of secession and things like that, they say, the North has tried to tell us that slavery is not a divinely instituted, a divinely mandated institution, and that that whites are not naturally superior to the Negro and stuff like that. So I think it would do well for everybody to acknowledge that, slavery was a catalyst. I'm using that language.
Right.
I mean, I'm really...
I just mouthed over to Nick. Can he say that?
I don't know if you're allowed to.
So, we just talked about how all the whites were in Left Behind. But I mean...
So all the whites were left behind.
Someone's gonna mishear all of this and go, you know what? That CVC podcast, they're racist.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, but...
We probably are.
So, I mean, we have to acknowledge that and say, the catalyst was slavery, even though the other ideals of rebellion and flipping off the man and all that's legit. I feel that too, but you have to understand that other people will be offended. Imagine being black and knowing that slavery was the cause of the Civil War and going to Stonewall Jackson, know, and knowing that Stonewall gave a slave as a gift to his daughter. I understand.
Because we live in an area with a Stonewall Jackson High School.
Yeah, I understand the other side there, and I'm okay if they want those monuments gone.
Yeah.
I don't like anyone tearing down statues. The first image that comes to mind is the Iraqi people tearing down the Saddam Hussein
Right.
statue, which
Yep.
that too is a good thing, but still, it's like
It led to some pretty terrible things.
yeah, it's just this. Are we the same? You know, like
I would have an issue with it as well if people who were on the other side went to tear down the Lenin statue in Seattle. I'd have the same exact issue with it. Just I don't want statues taken down in general.
Right.
I mean, you know, there's even we've had that conversation of moving it to a museum or whatever. But even then, a lot of those people are still arguing they shouldn't be in museums.
right, and that's for a lot of these folks not an option.
No.
I feel like
need
they
to be
want.
melted down.
I feel like they want to rewrite history and
There's a lot of
erase slavery
1984
from our existence and from our history, and we can't do like we shouldn't do that. We need to remember those.
I will
things.
say if these people really want to like.
What do you mean these people?
These people on the side of removing you. What do you mean, you people? If they want to remove faces of slavery, or whatever, then you got to get rid of your money.
But why not put up
And
a statue of Nat Turner?
I will
you're
gladly
gonna
take
remember
all of their
slavery?
money. If they,
Because no one knows who that is.
I mean, I think these same people would love to put up monuments to slavery in a sense that they're not going to
I
forget
have
slavery.
literally heard that some statues should be torn down to be replaced with people like Missy Elliott.
Right.
No.
And
To which I said,
that's absurd.
why?
Yeah.
Right.
But here's another thing, and this kind of goes off topic, but it really doesn't. We've been talking for the past 20 minutes about slavery. Slavery's still a big deal.
It still
There are
happens.
more slaves in the world today than there have ever been in human history. It was an awful, awful part of our past. It's an awful part of our present that we choose to ignore and shun away.
And we also like to think that we were for whatever reason, for some reason think we're the only country that ever did it. But slavery was totally a thing that just was a thing. Like most everybody.
But I will say that it comes off as not being that bad a part of our past when we have statues to the people that fought for slavery
And when we continue to sell people as sex slaves,
on government property. And maybe those two things are related.
Who's selling people as sex slaves?
all of the entire underground.
We're gonna
No,
be
yeah.
called-
And we
we'll be-
don't
we'll
have
be
their
called phobic
statues
if we
on
say it.
government property.
Do I?
We don't have their statues on government
No, we
property.
don't.
No.
We'll be called phobic if we say.
Oh, okay. I mean, I don't.
I mean, things like the Super Bowl are considered the number one events that people have sex slaves
Which is terrible.
because
Wow.
people, typically men, go out of town. They're nowhere near their homes, and so they think they can do whatever
Get away
they
with
want.
shenanigans.
And you can read up on any of this,
And they
stuff,
just
but
can't.
It's true.
They can't just go get themselves an honorable prostitute.
Well, that
Well, most of these are-
them they think are honorable prostitutes, but
They
most
don't
of
have
them
a
are people
choice
they
in
They're
that.
forced into it. Yeah,
They
yeah.
can't.
And it's crazy that can happen in like one of America's most cherished events.
Right.
I mean, that's not like a
Yeah.
fringe.
No.
Well, this happens in like Hawaii. You know, it's like no, this is right in the center of
Your
America.
big cities are
Yeah.
It's
some
a-
of your
wow.
biggest thing,
It's
and we
just
don't talk about that. Like we've
Diverting
been talking.
attention, basically.
Yeah, we've been talking
this
about
country's
slavery
horrible.
and from the racist standpoint, and rightfully so, especially historically. But we look at things now, and we don't call slavery what it is today. We're not in a hubbub about prostitution, about
Yeah.
these sex rings. And things like
so
that.
does that mean that we're changing definitions and twisting the terms then?
Someone would accuse us of
Because
that.
if that's the case, then that's even worse because that's just trying to cover it up.